program. And now your host, Brock Lawley.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. This Brock Lawley program. My name is Brock Lawley. I'm your fearless host. You know, something I thought might be somewhat interesting to kick around is where I disagree with the president-elect, and there are many areas. Now, I'm very, very, very happy that he's been elected president. I truly am. I think leftism as an ideology was literally an election away from snuffing out opposition, at least in this country, for a very, very, very long time. And just so you know where I'm personally coming from, that alone was enough of a motivation to support President-elect Trump, despite some pretty big differences between us. I also think Trump was the right man for the right time, in a sense. Washington had become deaf. Washington had become corrupt. Washington had become crustified. Of that, I don't even think there really is even a partisan debate. It's really where you put your laser pointer on that canvas of corruption. But that whole rat's nest, quite frankly, which of course WikiLeaks and so many other things exposed without, question. It was just nepotism meets power lust meets a total disregard for the people that they're governing, a complete laughable attempt to define public service in what they do. And quite frankly, that's probably the PG stuff, because the R-rated stuff would probably baffle the minds. I've long since thought that television show or the Netflix phenom House of Cards is actually much more accurate than not accurate. I really truly believe that. I think that the power brokers, let's just call them the elitist class, I just think they know no end. And there's the appetite is boundless and endless, and I just think that whole system, if you will, needed to completely come crumbling down. That entire just sort of echo chamber and power, cancer that was Washington, D.C. And I think, of course, that sentiment is spreading worldwide. Brexit and other things, European democracies are rising up and just dismissing some of this elitism. Now, they don't always define it properly, which frustrates me. It's leftism. They'll talk about bankers, or they'll talk about, they'll call it corruption, and it is all those things. I mean, it is bankers, it is crony capitalism, it is all these industries crawling in bed with the government and all this graft and stuff. But it's leftism. It's elite leftism. That's what leftism is. It's what it is in its naked form. It's not in its rhetorical form. Nonetheless, Donald Trump, he garnered my support for that reason. But Donald Trump and I are not ideological Siamese twins by any means. Not by any means. I'm actually a conservative. I don't believe Donald Trump is, not in the ideological sense. I think he's arguably more conservative than any other president in my lifetime, with the exception of Reagan, and I was just born at the time. But in my lifetime, I think he's the most conservative president. I don't think George W. Bush was a conservative. And moreover, I'll also say this: I think he'll govern arguably even more conservative than Ronald Reagan. So in that sense, I feel very, very comfortable with his administration. But I think on an ideological level, Donald Trump and I are not hand in glove. I think Donald Trump has a lot of comfort using the federal government, using the executive branch to solve problems. I do not feel that way. I am a very classical conservative in this way. I think if you show me 9 problems or 10 problems, at least 8 of them will be much better solved, addressed, approached without anything to do with the federal government or the state government. And I've thought this through. I mean, I believe this, and I think it's somewhat of a, with a little bit of thought detached from ideology and partisanship. I think it's a more universally understood and accepted thing than a lot of people think. I mean, I'll give you an example. How often do you meet your expectations in the private sector? I mean, it's very often, right? Most of the time you go out to a restaurant, Most of the time you buy a product. And of course, at least in the United States, there's a climate. A lot of people on the left don't like this, but there's a climate of consumerism. And what consumerism breeds is customer friendliness, customer awareness. So if there is a problem, you're very, very likely to have that customer, that restaurant, meet that problem hastily and to your satisfaction. And they're not doing this out of the goodness of their heart. They're not doing this for moral reasons. They're doing this because there are a lot of competitors which will swoop in and devour your loyalty, your customer loyalty, so on and so forth. And this system has just proven to meet the most needs, the most effectively, the most often. That's why I believe in it. And a lot of people don't understand the compartmentalizing. I'm not making a claim that this is somewhat morally superior. I'm making a claim that it's practically superior. I'm making the claim that it is the best way to solve the problem. I feel like a lot of these things that we involve government can be solved in the exact same way. We don't solve them in that way because, there are very, very powerful people who have a vested interest in keeping our mind on this sort of puppet show that, these are things that only government should handle. Because, you see, government is non-partial. Government is fair. Government is not looking out for a profit. Government isn't looking out for themselves. Government is a fair mover and shaker of the people's will. Government is a compilation of public servants who make their life waking up in the morning and thinking about your needs and wouldn't think about one business over another or one people group over another. I mean, this is like the sort of boilerplate way that government props itself up. Government, in fact, is none of those things, right? It's none of those things. It picks winners and losers based on graft and lobbying. It's completely corrupt. It completely looks out for its own interest, at least in the private sector, when things are dealt with. All those things are true. It's looking out for its own interest. It's often looking out for profit. And sometimes, and sadly, in 2016, it's looking out for profit more than it's looking out for people. But see, I have a reactionary and a very, very powerful reactionary tool or weapon in this war. And that is my consumerism. That is my customer loyalty. I can move, I can shake, I can demand results. I can't do that with government. I mean, to some extent, they tell us we can vote, but now we all have lost a lot of confidence in that. We realize that entire Democratic primaries can be openly stolen and people just yawn. So no, my sort of constitutionally protected right to vote is not the same thing as, many years ago, for an example, I stopped shopping at Target for no other reason that they wouldn't allow Salvation Army bell ringers during Christmas. And they came out with this nonsense reason and blah, blah, blah. I chose to stop giving them money because I did not like the way the company was handled. And then there's been lots of things since then. There's been transy bathrooms and leftist causes and nonstop, ridiculousness. So I've just stopped in any way, shape, or form will I ever, shadow the doorway of a Target. And I've actually spoken to hundreds of people about this and pleaded my case. My entire family, not all of them, but a lot of them have stopped shopping at Target. So I like to think that I put a dent in Target's bottom line. And by the way, this is an interesting thing. The Dow and the markets are through the roof. It's 2000. Dow 2000. I mean, they've never seen highs like this ever in the history of the market. Again, another reason that the media and the pundits and the predictions were dead wrong. Not wrong, dead wrong. Absolutely wrong. Almost as if they were making all the predictions up. Nonetheless, Target is one of the only companies in this sort of economic renaissance that we're seeing right now. More Christmas spending than ever. Target is down. Target is down 3%. So, all that to say, Target has taken some very public and what I would consider to be polarizing and disrespectful political stands in the last couple of years. I think they're paying for it. That's what I think. I think there's a lot of reasons for that, but I think they're paying for it. All that to say, I like that system. I prefer those solutions. I prefer the solutions that come, say, from the heartbeat of the private sector, which is at best meeting needs and services via the creativity and ingenuity of other Americans. So if your neighborhood was a little civilization, you guys would sort of carve up the things needed, you would barter, you would trade, you would meet each other's needs, rather than all having to raise chickens. One of you would raise chickens, rather than all having to, milk cows. One of you would milk cows, and the whole 9 yards. This is the case I'm making. I think it's much better than bureaucracy. I think, for example, if that were to be the case, it meets you right where you are. It meets you right where you are, rather than having an elitist city on the East Coast, lobbing their sort of elitist thoughts and their elitist opinions and their elitist regulations and their elitist this and that across the nation, Midwestern, caveats of the country and coastal regions and the agricultural regions and mining regions, and all these people, they don't have any clue. They don't know. They know what their lobbyists say. They know what's paying the bills. They know how to go in making $52,000 a year and leave making $3 million a year. That's what they know, and that's what they care about. Anyway, long-winded way of saying, I just think because Donald Trump was raised in New York, I think because in the time of his ascendance by way of his business, I think it was a given. It was a formality. It was baked into the cake reality that you would crawl into bed with bureaucrats. I mean, one of the things I thought was refreshing about Donald Trump is he was completely candid about that. Now, a lot of people think that's a ploy. Maybe it was. Maybe it wasn't. I just thought it was refreshing. I think Donald Trump just saying, look, guys, this is how it's done. If you want to do anything, this is what you got to do. You got to go. You got to, meet with one of Barack Obama's drones or one of Hillary Clinton's drones or one of Bill Clinton's drones or one of George W. Bush's drones. And you got to, grease the skids, and you got to do this, take the right people out to dinner, and you got to, donate to the right campaigns. You don't get permits, and then you can't do business. I mean, it's just so corrupt. Right? It's just so nasty. Well, anyway, this is what the guy marinated in. And I just think he feels a lot more comfortable using the levers of federal government, using the levers of government to solve problems than, say, I would if I was in the White House. It's a disagreement between us ideologically. Now, I'm not such a Puritan that I can't get behind what I think is going to be a very productive administration, because I don't think it's pure enough. But it's a big point of contention for me and what I perceive based on his rhetoric and actions. It's a big point of contention, a big difference between me and Donald Trump by way of ideology. That's what I'm trying to tell you. All right, so there's one, big government solutions, not lockstep with him on that. The other one, I suppose, the most potent and obvious example, I think, is just a lot of the behavior and the tools and the tactics that Donald Trump uses. There's been a lot of hay made of this. Here's where I come down on this. As a Christian man, as I read the Word of God, can't find justification for it anywhere. A mentor of mine used to call it wolf tactics. I think that's what it is. I think it works in the world. I think behaving this way and communicating this way, particularly in the world that we live in, is effective. I think Ben Carson is a prime example of the juxtaposition of that, and we saw how that played out. However, I'm also aware of the fact that, this is sort of a political game of high-stakes poker, and Donald Trump inherits an environment and a landscape politically, and a landscape culturally, more important, that has been so decimated, so morally gutted. And on an intelligence level, the way that we communicate with one another, the way that we express ideas is guttural, is meme-oriented, is base and insult centric and mockery. And for me, the irony of this election was that for the first time ever, and a lot of the reasons that conservative candidates in the past did not conduct themselves in this way is because they would expel Judeo-Christian values. When you do that, generally, you can't turn around and behave or rhetorically behave in the way Donald Trump did. Also, I think the Conservative Party is just so whiplashed, such an indentured servant kind of attitude about power. But that's neither here nor there. Well, for the first time, Donald Trump threw out that nonsense and said, no, this is the world I've been inherited, This is the way things are. To communicate, to succeed, and to be successful, what tactics are going to need to be, exhibited. He did so. It just took the left completely by storm. They had never had a conservative do this before. Now, here's what's the interesting caveat to this conversation, is that Democrats have always been doing that. I mean, in my lifetime, every election, the Republican candidate is openly mocked, is openly belittled, physically, mentally, throughout pop culture, his or her name drugged through the mud. The exact things that Donald Trump did this election to both the GOP primary opponents and then ultimately Hillary Clinton. The exact same thing. Branding them in pop culture, mocking them, calling them names. I mean, you know it and I know it, right? And most of the time, completely made up, completely fabricated stuff. Why? The Democrats have invented this. The Democrats have invented this form of politics, this sort of paradigm, if you will, of politics. The mocking, the name-calling, the insulting, the dragging the name through the mud, the scorched earth, and before anybody can get to the truth, the damage has been done, the reputation has been set in cement, and off you go, onto power. Now, when Donald Trump came along and threw that right back in their face, it was as if they were just stunned. They couldn't believe it. And this is what I found to be the most offensive, probably, is how morally indignant they were. No, you can't do this. You can't do this. This is wrong. You can't mock people. You can't call people names. This is wrong. Don't you realize it's wrong? Yes, we do realize it's wrong. And I'm speaking as a conservative here. I'm listening to them whine and bemoan this. And I'm thinking, yes, it's wrong. It's been wrong the last 20 elections that you've done it. Or anybody of any significance that has enough guts and fortitude to stand up in popular culture, have influence, and speak against your leftism. You use every sexual innuendo. You use every name, every form of mockery, from the pop culture hitmans to the late night comedians to the politicians. You use every type of slander. And the whole, reaction to it was just remarkable. It's like, we do this. You guys can't do this. You guys can't do this. That's how we win. So I just want to lay the groundwork for the case here. I understand this. I understand why Donald Trump did it. It clearly was effective. But what I'm telling you is I disagree with him on this based on my Judeo-Christian values. Because at the end of the day, even if it is effective, and it was effective for Donald Trump, it was effective. And ultimately, I think good will come of it. Good comes of doing bad sometimes. But that doesn't mean that bad in and of itself is still right or justifiable, is my point. Because, my loyalties are to a kingdom higher than this. My eyes are upon a kingdom in a way that is not this way. And even if it gets short-term gains, it doesn't get long-term gains. And so that's essentially my thoughts on that. There's a lot more, but this is running long. So essentially that's it. There's a lot of disagreement. Hardly do I march lockstep. However, I think Donald Trump is a man uniquely suited for this time. And if he has fight in him, and I certainly think he's proven that he does, I think he could change the country for the better. I think he's really kind of a unique tool in the tool shed. And there was just a perfect storm, a lack of credibility in the system, a lack of credibility in the media. He exploited it well. What kind of sovereignty is at play here? We'll find out. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for listening to the Brock Lawley program. Be a people of fortitude, character, and abounding courage.
Join the courage culture. Visit Brock's YouTube channel for an intellectual arsenal against the lies of leftism.